if you've got an intranet which is stale, it's not working, or maybe you're halfway through an intranet project and you're struggling to structure information and basically just bring it to life, then I think this is going to be really useful for you today. So my name is Rupert Squires. I'm a client director here at Information EXP. I'm joined with Ben. Hi, Ben.
Hi everyone, yes, I'm Ben Leach. I am the Consulting Director at Information EXP.
Excellent, Ben. Glad to have your experience with us today. So this is for you if you're an intranet owner. It may be as that role you are internal communications, HR. It might actually be your entire role. Or maybe you're an IT manager or director and you're operating at a higher level and looking to get some insight on what makes an intranet come together. So today, Ben, what are we going to be covering? What are people going to walk away with?
Yeah, so in terms of the takeaways, we'll start with, why do organizations get stuck on intranet creation or setting up or configuring the intranets and their content? We'll look at the gap between the sort of content author or publisher's goals and what the end user needs. And ultimately, we're going to run through 5 keys to designing a SharePoint intranet that people actually use.
Okay, so just before we get into that, we have done another video before on SharePoint intranets, and that's kind of more of a strategic approach we take to an intranet. So if you're looking after this for something, a bit broader, talking about things like, well, who's on my steering group, then certainly dive into that one afterwards. Or if you're short for time, on our website, we've got that deck downloadable, so you can go and download it and go through at record speed. Now, coming back towards today, let's just start, Ben, with well, why do intranets go wrong in the first place? Plenty of organizations have them, yet we still get phone calls saying it's not working for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, there's a few key points on here that we've pulled together, and I'll sort of start. So the first is really looking at that wrong viewpoint or wrong perspective. I would say that often content authors, they focus on their own departmental perspective and needs instead of considering the needs of the end user or perhaps new starters, which often leads to sort of misaligned content and misaligned expectations.
Yeah, and let's move on from misaligned content, and then we get to sort of confusing content. And this is where you're asking people to create content who aren't normally, journalists or content authors. So they come up with either too much information, like that brain dump of everything that they know, or there's not enough context, backstory. They're not answering the key questions that people want to go, because people go to the internet generally to get a question answered. And so trying to understand, why they're not striking that balance and giving them the tools to support them to do that. This is another reason why, some intranets really struggle to get off the ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's really important to help people sort of understand what good content looks like and how they can achieve it. And that really leads into um, one of the other challenges that we see often, which is a lack of design standards. We'll often see that there are inconsistencies in layout, imagery, tone of voice, and even just overall design across the intranet pages. So having a consistent standard is really needed to improve that kind of end user experience, I would say.
Yeah, I think, and if you take that, which supports, I guess, the final point, which we're going to go today, and by no means is this a complete list of why internets go wrong. These are a few of the themes that we've picked out today. It's the findability. How many times have you had that conversation where someone said, "Oh yeah, it's on the internet," but you don't know where to find it, or if you do find it, you're not confident that that is the current version, it's up to date. You go back to the head of HR or whoever it might be and say, "Is this really, our leave policy?" And so it's that findability. So documents need to be structured, or your content needs to be structured in such a way that it's easy to navigate, because that's how some people like to find, or search. That's how people like to find for that information. Using plain language, using language that end users might use to find that. And consider it that not everyone's worked in your organization for years and years. And actually, some people might have joined that week and they might not know some of the terms or the three-letter acronyms that you might use internally. So these are some of the challenges that we see why internets go wrong. But, let's move on from why they go wrong, Ben. Let's start putting things in place so they can start going right. What's the first step?
Yeah, so the first step really is getting the right principles in place in the first place. And really, in order to do that, we really do need to start with what is the guiding purpose of your intranet. So, in our experience, we find that intranets really serve two key purposes. They serve the purpose of engagement, really looking at things like news content, the values, the mission, the strategy, gathering employee feedback, promoting events, and supporting employee conversations. And then the other really, really important part of this is looking at productivity. So
Mhm.
signposting to standard key resources that are published and really that single source of the truth of information, so people don't need to go around asking someone to find the most up-to-date version of something. That intranet content and knowledge is easily searchable, and often it will be the key place where you're publishing your company policies or organization policies, for example. But Rupert, I think what I would say here is that the engagement and productivity, it's not always a 50-50 in terms of priority. So do you want to just kind of elaborate on that point a bit more?
Yeah, I think, when I say smaller businesses tends to, and it's not just on size, it may be less on complexity, but smaller businesses tend to be more focused on productivity side because of the nature of the size of the organization. Most people know what's going on, maybe because they all work in a common office or a common workplace, and there's more individual touch points. So those kind of organizations are more about productivity. One example I was speaking to yesterday, they were very much like, we've got all these technical data sheets we want to publish into our intranet, so everybody's working off the same version. How do we create that knowledge base? And so that's very much on a productivity side rather than the engagement side. Speaking to larger organizations or organizations which are distributed across multiple locations where maybe there's not, you're not going to have everyone speaking to everybody else just by the size of the organization, then they're more focused on news and how do we get content created and stories created from our different offices and different locations to start building us together more cohesively as an organization. And I guess the final point here is we talked about information worker versus frontline worker. So information worker, somebody who tends to spend their role in front of a laptop or PC, whereas a frontline worker, somebody who might be working on a shop or floor, or might be working in a factory, manufacturing, or something along those lines, where they're occasionally using a device. And so, they tend to be more about, well, what's happening in the organization. It might be the answer to replace a company newsletter, for example. So there's a balance, and it's going to be different for every organization. And when you've established that balance, then you'll start knowing where to focus your energy on when it comes to your intranet. But that's what it is, Ben. It's sometimes helpful to reverse that and say, well, if that's what it is, what isn't it? Or what goes somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think probably the first thing that we'd call out is highlight that the intranet is not meant to be a collaboration space or a place for doing your daily work and file management. It's not necessarily your digital workplace of where you go day to day. It's an area for published resources. It's your entry point to where you go. It doesn't mean that SharePoint isn't for collaboration and document management and file storage, of course, but the intranet is your entry point to what you're doing and then signposting you to those other spaces. So it's acting as that sort of published resources, news, springboard to those other systems. The other thing I'd highlight is that in the first instance, certainly initially when you're getting your internet off the ground, don't spend too much energy and effort trying to make it an integration platform and bringing all sorts of dynamic feeds of data in from a HR system or another system so that it renders seamlessly in the intranet. That's quite a lot of development effort and isn't necessarily going to get the right return on that effort that you put in. It doesn't mean that you don't want to do that at a later date, but what I would say instead is focus on signposting people to those tools, but focusing on getting the content right in your intranet and taking people to those tools instead of trying to integrate with them.
Okay, so that's useful. Actually, that brings me nicely onto the takeaways of this section, which is really your intranet's for publishing. It's not where you collaborate, where you do your filing. Again and again, you speak to organizations where they've set up maybe the HR site, and part of it has permissions where everybody can see it, and part of it has permissions which only the HR people can have it. That is not good practice. Really, you need to be thinking at a site level about the purpose of this site is to serve information to our people, or the purpose of this site is to hold all our financial records. That's a different part. That's not your intranet. It still sits in SharePoint. The second piece, so we talk about user confidence. Really, what you're trying to do with Intranet is keep people informed, but also protect your support functions, your people in HR, your people in IT. So when you're getting the same question over and over again, they can self-serve. They can find the answer to that information. But to have that in place, that information needs to be current, it needs to be accurate. You need a single version of it. The last thing you need is two versions of a policy in your intranet, which are slightly different, and then that's going to cause confusion and potentially cause issues as well. And then the final point is, and I think some points you touched on earlier, but it's where I start. It's not looking to replace everything else in your organization, but it's more here's some information, but here's signposts, links to other applications we use. So many things are being thrown at us now with different cloud apps, different things just within Microsoft, but more broadly. If you use your intranet, your starting point, then it's clear that that's where everyone starts, and that's where you can find the right assets to go and do your job. So Ben, that sets out the, I guess, the framework. If we think about what is my lowest common denominator, where do I start when I'm thinking about my audience?
Yeah, exactly. And as we say here, it's think like a new starter, focus on the audience and not the content creator. I always highlight to people, think of that new starter that's just joined and they want an overview of your organization. They want to access things like their benefits and know what information is available to them around that. They need to get to policies. They need to know what to do if, they need to get a new device, those types of things. So think of that new starter when you're positioning what your intranet structure and content is going to be. And what we do with this is we really, when we're talking through intranet design workshops, we use this terminology of what do I need? So I am an employee of your organization. What do I need? And as we say, we're focusing on the content within those support functions, facilities, people, IT, perhaps health and safety. What do you need as the organization? What do you need me to know about? So it could be things like leadership messaging, it could be compliance related issues or crisis management, it could be product releases that you want me to know about. And then the final thing is around what would you like me to know about, but isn't necessarily mission critical, but supports the culture. So project successes, new joiners, celebrating new joiners, celebrating client wins, very much that news focused content. So I think with that, shall we just quickly fire up our demo environment and take a look at how that starts to take shape?
Yeah, it'd be good to bring that to life and see, well, what does it actually translate to? So, Ben, here we are. We're in the demo environment here. Take me away.
Yeah, all right, good stuff. So we're at our intranet homepage, as we said in the previous section. This is our springboard. It's got our resources, our tools, and can take me to those other things. And that's great. But looking at that terminology, what do I need? Well, I am an employee. I'm coming to this intranet and I want to find out about my benefits. So in order to do that, I'm going to hover over the intranet navigation there, and I'm going to go straight to, within one click, straight to that key topic that's promoted under that people section. So my employee benefits page is going to come up, and here I'm going to see the various different things that are on offer, and we'll explore that a little bit later on. So that's the first thing. The next thing is that, Rupert, as perhaps the CEO of this organization, wants everyone who joins to be aware of what our vision and our values are. So again, on the intranet homepage, that's the very first thing that we're promoting, which is that vision, purpose, values, things like accountability, organizational charts, etc. So again, we're really promoting and pushing those things that we want everyone to be able to see. And then the final point, let's just jump back to the internet homepage itself, of course, is the news. So the first thing we see when we hit our intranet homepage is the news components, and they're bringing through those good news stories. There will be critical stuff and important stuff that's been pushed through here as well, but this is where the sort of culture element, where you can celebrate successes and those types of things, and that's very much front and center on the homepage. And as we see, we've got an example. Do you want to tell us a bit more about this example page we're looking at, Rupert?
Yeah, so this case study, organization called Banyards. If you want to read the case study, it's on our website, informationexp.com, published there. But it's an example of content which, that as an employee, does it matter if you don't read it? It's probably not the end of the world, but certainly gives you a bit more insight to what's going on in the organization. So it's that kind of information which is sort of we'd like you to know about. I think it's probably a good example of that, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah, exactly. So let's just jump back to the takeaways, I think. So Rupert, do you want to take this away and summarize it?
Yeah. So I think it's that first point, which is look at the lens through, a week one, shall we say, 1 week. What do I need to know in that first week of being in an organization? What are the kind of questions that I need to ask? You can also take that a step further by going speaking to people in HR and saying, well, look, if you have a queries inbox or a question form, what are the things you're seeing over and over again? Because that's the kind of questions that you need to answer. And you come from a sort of mindset of let's answer questions rather than just pushing out content. Second thing is use language which is, as one book described it, weekend language. So it's not deeply technical language, it's language everyone would understand, to help people find the right information easily. Particularly if you use lots of acronyms which might be unique to your organization, that's going to help people find the right information more quickly. And then when you're taking on your internet, thinking, well, where do we start? I think it's Ben touched there. Look at those support functions. So look at things like HR, like IT, like facilities, where there's going to be a lot of demand for those kind of Q&A type questions. So that's probably a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so Ben, we've talked about the kind of content, the focus areas, and this difference between, the information that people need to receive or get pushed to them. But let's move on to the next stage where we're talking about, well, how do we make this consumable in the easiest possible way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this phrase that we're using, consistency beats creativity, and we're seeing this a lot in SharePoint. SharePoint is becoming, very dynamic, and there's a lot of focus on making SharePoint pages look, really, really beautiful and elegant and really powerful in that regard. But actually, to be honest, I think that can be a bit of a distraction. And really, what we want to focus is a consistent user experience. So I think let's jump back to our demo again, and we can take a look at this.
Okay, here we are.
Good stuff. So the first thing we're going to think about is consistency across our SharePoint sites. So Rupert, would you mind going to our IT homepage, please?
Okay, so I'm in the internet navigation here. I can see the key support functions that we've highlighted. So I'll click on IT.
Yeah, perfect. So on our IT site, we've got some IT news stories that are being promoted, some useful content that people want to benefit from. We've got those important links to things like the policies, training, other types of things that we want people to see. We're putting that space if someone needs to go and raise a question and they can ask IT directly. And we're even including things like Beaver Engage feeds there to support a bit more peer-to-peer type knowledge sharing. So all in all, that looks like a fairly well thought out, intranet site homepage. And I would just highlight it's quite different to the out of the box communication site experience that you get. So let's go and have a look at our people site.
Okay, let's do that.
It's probably no surprise to see that this looks fairly consistent. So when I come to this site, it looks pretty much the same as my IT site, but the content is different. So we are promoting the things that we want people to see using the news. We're making it easy for what I need to get to through my links and making that easy, in that regard. And any key things that I need people to know about are being pushed through in things like call to action. So we're still thinking about that need, we would like you to see concept, but this is consistent now. So as I go from site to site, it looks the same. So that's
Perfect.
site level templating. And then the next thing is to look at, page level templating. So perfect. If you go to our employee benefits page here, that's great. So what we'll see in a second is, as we saw earlier, a page that focuses on a particular topic. So employee benefits is one topic. And then Rupert, if you could go into the cycle to work page a minute, please.
Yeah, I think it's just worth highlighting. We've used this sort of secondary heading here, and you're going to see how that flows through in a cycle to work page because SharePoint doesn't do a classic breadcrumb as you might find on some classic internet sites. So, using a few design standards here, we can help the user realize where they are in the context of the site.
Yeah, that's such a good point, actually, and I should have mentioned that because it's such a good point. When we're thinking in our intranet, we really focus on having a topic-based intranet, and there'll be topics and subtopics. So cycle to work is effectively one of the many benefits that we have, but we can see that we've brought that consistency at the top using the employee benefits. Now, what we're looking at this page is, again, a page template that we're using where we've got a nice banner image. We've decided the layout of the banner image. We have a right-hand section, which is the periphery or supporting content. So who the page owner is, i.e. who's the person responsible for keeping this page up to date? Are there any additional resources that we're signposting to, perhaps taking people away from this page? Whether it's looking at, approved suppliers or retailers list, for instance, the actual form itself, queries that you might have. So the supporting content. And then in the center, we've got that primary content. And again, we're using a consistent approach to using our heading styles. And that's not just from a readability perspective, but also from an accessibility perspective as well. So if there's anyone with a visual impairment, we're appropriately using the heading styles consistently so that their experience is going to be, just as good as someone, is able to see more proficiently. So as we've highlighted, we've got a nice looking standardized page here. And now if we were to create a new page for one of the other benefits, if we just go new page, and we have all of these out of the box templates, and I generally just advise you don't use any of them. They're just demos, really. You really want to set up your own. So if we go to saved on this site, we'll see we've got a couple, and we're going to use the topic page template. So if you just go and click on that, create that page, please. Marvelous. Yeah, let's just go and create the page. Go a second.
Okay, so Ben, just why it's doing that, this topic page, this only sits within the site, right? That template doesn't sit across the entire SharePoint estate.
No, that's correct. That is something that we'll come back and have a brief discussion about in a minute, our takeaways. But yeah, absolutely. So that is relevant to that site only. But as we can see, we have that sidebar with the page owners and the resources that we're going to populate. We've got the right layout of the banner. And actually, as you highlighted, when we set this up, is that you've got that consistent layout of content. So when a user is coming to a page like this, they don't have to think too much. It's not like they've got a sort of blank canvas that they need to fill in. They can go in and fill in those key bits, the supporting resources, and then fill in the bullet points that they need to put through in those sections in the center there.
And yeah, I guess this is where, if you are down the AI route, this is where AI can help to start create some of that content for you. So you can be
Yeah,
quite tight about that. Okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
So this kind of
Well,
takes the burden off of the page creators, but also has that consistent end user experience too.
perfect. Okay. So anything else you'd like me to demo on here, Ben, or shall we just dive into a few of those points around templating, which you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth going to the key takeaways actually. So if we just switch back to the deck a minute. Yeah, I think that point about site and page templates,
Mm.
it is an important point. It isn't available out of the box with SharePoint easily, but that's the kind of thing that we do for our customers, where we help them set up easy, repeatable sites using a framework, and we make those page templates available within all of those sites. Now, it may be that you have an approach like that, and it's something we'd certainly recommend doing, but that's really where you want to focus on. Do you want to just pick up and summarize the other points, Rupert, quickly?
Yeah, I think so. And I think um, let's talk about brand and images. So images, there's a concept in SharePoint called organizational assets, and the value of that is you, maybe it's a central marketing department or owners of a brand, you can put those images into SharePoint so people can easily select those and reuse them. We have a general principle when we're working with clients that if you're going to have images with people in them, have them as your own people. When you start using stock images like we've got on our demo environment, it does look a bit like a website for a very small company rather than maybe who you really are. And
Yeah.
so, if you do need images, then take images of buildings or meeting rooms and that kind of thing, from or shots of people from behind their heads, so we're not revealing identities. So that's a tip of what we would do when we work with clients. I think the other thing on here is just be careful of all these Microsoft tools, as these new flexible components, which although look great in the Microsoft ads, when we translate it and use them in websites, they don't always stack up. They certainly don't do very well when it comes to, Ben talked about, the narrator and those kind of accessibility tools. They really struggle with that. And they also struggle on mobile devices. We also know that Microsoft SharePoint can now support multiple fonts, but you'll find it's not been implemented across every tool and every label. So again, it looks a bit inconsistent. So really, as much as we love new shiny stuff, if you keep it simple, you will get a better result. And if you look at some of the world's biggest websites, let's take the BBC, it's a very standard site, but people go there time after time after again because they can get content from there. So I think a few things there. And one of the things that we do when we get involved in internet projects is we do what we call content author training. And the purpose of that is to not only talk about the technical side of how do you add a page in SharePoint, as you saw, relatively easy, but more about let's make sure you understand the brand standards, how we use H1, H2, H3, how we use colors, how we use images, those kind of things. So yeah, it's quite a big piece, but if you get it right, then you are going to create a better experience for your users, and they're going to come back and they can spend more energy finding the information, finding and consuming information rather than trying to navigate, the unique designs of every single page. I think I said an awful lot there, so I'm going to wrap it up there. Let's move on to the big thing, Ben, which everyone loves to talk about, which is AI.
Not quite.
It's
Not quite.
not quite. We're getting to AI. I'm getting too excited. We're back onto findability. Sorry. So you
In
created
time.
this content, Ben. How do we find it?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, key thing with this is how do we make our content findable? And regardless of things like metadata and search and AI, as we'll see shortly, we really do need to have that sort of SEO mindset when we are creating our content. I think probably the big thing that we focus on is a topic based intranet. So again, I think, if we maybe just switch back to the demo again and just take a quick look at this, what we'll see there is findability, on a number of levels here. Excuse me, I'll just expanding my screen a bit so it's easier for me to see. So there's findability on a number of levels here. If we think about our content, we're going to go back to our cycle to work scheme a minute, if you don't mind. So if we go to our employee benefits, perfect.
Okay.
So we'll have our
Go
yeah. Perfect. So we have our employee benefits page, and again, just using simple, clear, and concise titles. And I think probably the example, maybe just go back actually a minute, go back to the employee benefits page a minute.
No problem.
So the thing here, and I do see this quite a lot, I also see it with things like absence and leave. Sometimes there's a tendency to try and cram too much information onto a page. So I think what we've done here, instead of trying to include all of the content for all of the benefits on a single employee benefits page, we're breaking it down into multiple pages. So we have a dedicated cycle to work page. So again, Rupert, at the risk of getting you to click back and forth many times, we click on the cycle to work page, last time I promise. So this has its own page title. It's a self-contained piece of content. So when someone goes to do a search, they will see that particular page and that search term come through, and it will be easier for them to find. So that's the first thing, is around thinking that sensible, clear and concise page titles. Don't try and merge too many topics together in a single page, because although it may be easier in terms of the number of clicks, it's not as easy in terms of search. And then the other thing I would say is bringing those topics through into our hub navigation. So Rupert, if you just hover over the hub navigation one more time, if you don't mind, what we're doing is, by making this a topic focused intranet as opposed to purely a department focused, those key topics are brought straight into the hub navigation. So an end user can get to those key questions, those key things, whether it's requesting devices or finding about absence and leave. All of that is centrally available and easily accessible via our via our hub navigation. There is one
Okay.
little other point. Well, sorry, go on, repeat.
So we're using our navigation to drive people towards the answers rather than just
Yeah.
simply reflect the structure of organization. Hence why I'm not seeing a sales with all the sales things on this list, because that's not something that's not going to answer a lot of questions for people, right? And they don't have
Yeah,
a lot of content.
exactly. So just a couple more points I just want to highlight. So Rupert, do you mind just going back to the home page again? I am sort of sending you around the houses a little bit on our intranet, but it's a good thing. It's easy to navigate. So yeah, just going back to the homepage a minute, we need to talk about hubs. We need to talk about hub sites and what that means in terms of search. So the first thing that we've highlighted is how we have this consistent navigation across all the different areas. And the reason we have that is because all of the intranet sites are combined within one central hub site as far as SharePoint is concerned. And as Rupert is highlighting here, we do have other hubs. We've got a workspace hub, we've got a projects hub that we can take people to, and that's great. But what I have seen with some organizations, and I think this is a mistake, to be honest, is instead of trying to create an intranet hub that deals with this purpose, they'll create department focus hubs. So they'll have a HR hub that's got a HR homepage, and then it's got HR private sites connected to it. And they'll have a finance hub and a sales hub. And the real challenge with that is that you're not getting a centralized search experience. If you go back to our homepage a minute, and let's just do a search, if you don't mind, Rupert, for employee benefits. Yeah, so just type employee benefit, just hit return. So we can go to the search results page. So what we can see here is the default experience with this is that it is only returning results from the intranet hub connected sites, but it is returning results from all of those sites. So I can go to a single place, do a search, and know I'm getting all of those combined published resources available to me, and not having to go to the HR to do a HR search or the finance area to do a finance search. If I want to search across the whole organization, I can do that because I can just go back a level within the focus there, and that's absolutely fine. And there is a little bit of a point I would highlight, which is that if you have configured Viva connections, you will just need to repoint this so it does a hub focus search. The last point very quickly is about metadata. We don't put lots and lots of focus on tagging lots of metadata. That is more relevant for a knowledge base, but for an intranet and a support function focused intranet, it's better to have clear, concise titles and a clear navigation experience, and what we'll see shortly, supported by AI.
Yeah, I think the exception maybe to that is probably policies, where if you're publishing policies for your intranet, then having that metadata against those documents, particularly we've got a large volume of policies, is really going to help in a search experience like this. So if you give it a second, obviously all these filters on the left-hand side, driven by metadata. But good points in findability, Ben. So let me just quickly summarize what you talked about there in terms
So
of
jump back to takeaways. Yeah, let's have a look.
So one hub, one intranet hub, ideally. Obviously, if your organization is global, you might have separate separate solutions. If you've got a US focus or maybe a European focus, but generally we're looking at one hub, and then within that hub, create focus sites to solve people, HR, IT for those big support functions. Think about it with sort of an SEO style marketing mindset. So what do people want answered? What are they going to search for? Use natural plain language. Help people find the answers quickly through the navigation, but navigation doesn't or shouldn't be an exact reflection of how your company is structured, but think about the way that people see problems. If your pensions are managed by the finance department, doesn't mean they can't be under the people section, because that's what people might expect to find them. And then think about audience targeting. So SharePoint allows you to target links and content to certain groups of people which you set up in advance. Doesn't stop other people from viewing that content. So it's not a security trim, but it's more of you're in finance, you probably want this document or you want access to this link. So think about that, particularly if larger organizations might find that useful. You can tie that back to I think your M365 groups, can't you, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, now on to the AI advantage. What can AI do in this, Ben? What role can it play?
Yeah, as you say, nowadays you can't really get away with doing a webinar on an intranet without, starting to talk about AI. So I think we'll go straight back to demo again. So just wait for that to come through. Just
Okay.
going to expand so I can easily. So we're going to talk about two key things here when it comes to AI. We're going to talk about creating content and searching for content. I think I'll probably go to searching for content first. So as we said before, when I'm trying to find information, try and find answers, um, focusing on that SEO mindset, using sensible plain English terms. But where the AI search comes into place is that it doesn't rely quite so much on getting the keywords right, it's able to interpret things. So, for instance, if you are a multinational organization and some people use the phrase vacation and some people, like us Brits, use the phrase holiday, you don't have to worry about tagging up multiple keywords to search that because the AI search understands that it is the same thing. Okay, so let's take a quick look at our AI search. So the first thing we're going to look at is what is available with Microsoft Copilot. If you've gone all in with Microsoft Copilot licenses for all of your users, then you will have this experience available. And what we've done, we'll give it a second to load. So what we have done is configured our default site search agent or AI agent so that it is pointed to all of the key sites within our intranet and all of the published policies. And we've got some default prompts and things that we can do. So as we can see, Rupert's looking at the remote working policy. It's pulling the content through. That's great, as we'd expect. It's
Okay.
prompting us so we can go to the policy if we need it.
There it is. Yeah.
Absolutely. So the thing is, what I would say is not everyone has got Copilot licenses. Not everyone has gone all in on that. And obviously with Copilot, sometimes if you're just looking to get an AI search for an intranet, having a Copilot license for everyone isn't necessarily the best ROI. There are other things you need to be focusing on to get that real ROI out of Copilot. Whereas if you want to dip your toe in the water and effectively be able to get AI answers to a thin layer of content, i.e. your intranet, this is where our own knowledge bot comes into play. So this is still using OpenAI. It's in your data. It's in your data center within Azure. But what we can see here is it's focused purely on the intranet content and it becomes more of a pay-as-you-go basis, which is a bit more cost effective for a lot of organizations for this particular use case. So as you can see, Rupert's done a search for expenses. We can see that there's content that's come through. We've got the policy, and then we get the suggested follow-on prompts, as you would expect. And if I'm probably a little bit biased, I think ours is a little bit faster than Copilot, but that's because Copilot is doing all of the security trimming its responses. We're focusing on published content.
Okay, Ben. So that's the search side. Let's talk about creation of content.
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at this. I think the first thing we're going to do is, so a lot of these features are quite new, actually. So the first thing we're going to look at doing is the out of the box feature for creating a page with AI. So if you just go new, and we're going to go page with AI, and we're going to get this prompt. If you want to go and do that, Rupert, when you talk us through what
Yeah.
you're doing.
So again, if you use ChatGPT, it's similar. The difference between this and ChatGPT is your file does need to be in SharePoint. It's not something you can upload as part of the process. And then I can create a news post based for this document. What I've done is I've created one earlier because it is a little bit slow. Here we go. And I did it based on our success service, which is our support service for SharePoint and Teams. And what I found is, and this is created all from one document, even when I told it to be short and punchy, it can't be short and punchy. It's literally taken the whole document and published it into a news post. So for me, and I think Ben, we've agreed internally as an organization, this is not quite there yet in terms of how we see value. So I think creating a whole page from scratch using a document and a prompt is probably not going to give the value that your end users need. I think what's more interesting is something that you showed me earlier, Ben, which is this, which is when you start with a page and you start looking at components from a SharePoint perspective, AI perspective. So what we've done here, if I go into a page and click edit, and just for context, so when we were looking at Copilot for search, everyone who wants to access that will need a Copilot license or will need to be on a consumption plan for Copilot. Whereas when we're creating content, only the content author needs to have a Copilot license. So there's a key difference there. And what you'll notice when I click on this text block here is we've got this new icon here, which is called Draft with AI. I can click on that, and then I could rewrite this punchy statement on the environment policy. I haven't tried this, so let's see what comes up.
Yeah,
and if we don't like it, we don't have to accept it, but yeah, go on then.
Exactly. And just for background, this page was generated using that AI feature. We passed in our environmental policy. The prompt that I used to build this is say, I want no more than 2 sentences with a summary and why we're promoting this and why this environmental policy is important. As we can see here, Rupert's got a response. You can use that draft or refine it a little bit more. So I had to refine it a couple of times when I was doing that initial response. But the thing I really like about this approach is that we're using the page templates that we've already set up. So it still has that consistency, but we're using AI where we want it to do those summaries. And then the new really cool feature, I have to say, is this new FAQs component. So we've already put a whole load of existing content, and probably the best way to demonstrate this is do this again, if you will. So we're going to add that one again. So Rupert, why don't you talk us through what you're doing?
So the FAQ here. So what's great about this, we can point it at the files. You said you've got the environmental policy here. So as part of our policy management solution, we published a PDF policy there. The purpose is, it is a policy. I don't need any other details. And it effectively takes a 3-stage process. So stage 1 is it creates categories here. And it's going to create similar to before because we already created this. And now you can edit these categories or add new categories before you get onto the next stage, which then now create questions about this. So I click on draft questions. It's now going to go for each of those categories and create a handful of questions, typically 3 to 5 type of questions. Again, at this level, you can go edit questions, remove questions, add new questions. We give that a second to finish, so it's working through that list there. And then the final piece is we now need answers. And again, it's referring that. So I think this is really useful when you're publishing content to your intranet. Maybe you've got a lengthy policy document and you're saying, well, actually, no, people might not read that. So let's make sure that we're going to give them a quick summary of, what's in that document. And as it's SharePoint, there's a couple of things worth noting. You can go and edit the content when it's produced, but if you change your underlying document, it's not going to impact the FAQ. You're going to have to regenerate it and start again. So I think that's some nice stuff there, which is happening in the AI front in terms of SharePoint. And probably a good place is to give you the takeaways of that AI section, and bring us towards the end of this webinar. So I think the takeaway number 1 is when you're creating content, look at the elements. I don't think pages are there yet. Let's see where that goes and keep a track on that as the technology evolves. Number 2, AI search. I think this is really useful. I think, as Ben touched on earlier, if you create the scope of your search to limit to your published information, then you're going to create a really trustworthy agent there to help you, whether that's Copilot, whether it's some solution like we've generated. But as we saw before, AI, you still have to get the content right. So whether that's creating good content, there's no point just putting noise out there, or whether you're searching existing content, you've got to get the content right. So this is definitely, certainly on the search thing, something towards the end of your internet project rather than the beginning. So hopefully that was useful. Now, if you did find this internet useful, let me just cover a couple of next steps with you. The first thing is you might like to watch our internet strategy webinar that goes on for a little, similar time, but we're going to be covering the full life cycle from end to end, from what do I need to start a project, taking you through the delivery process, and also what does it look like to maintain an intranet. Alternatively, if this has sparked some ideas, you'd like to have another conversation or it's a conversation with myself and dive a little bit deeper into what you're trying to do, then do book a call at my diary. You can do that by going to our website, informationexp.com. Also, if you're watching this on YouTube, it will be in the comments below in the description, so you can click on that link and go straight in there. But really, I hope you found that useful. Maybe 1 or 2 bits there which you can take away and maybe change the direction of your intranet. But Ben, thank you again for your input and your experience.
Yeah,
And
thanks very much, Rupert.
look forward to seeing you all on the next one.
Good stuff. Thanks, everyone.